Okay, good afternoon, folks, and thanks so much for bearing with us. Do you know this is actually, I must be jinxed this CIS 2017. On Monday at the workshop, at the Kantara workshop, we were all set to go. For the whole previous week, we had been uploading, the range of slides, 3 hours worth of presentations, and Andy Himdall was keeping us very much on task. So you imagine we arrived there 5 minutes to 9, no slides at all. So we actually, the process, of course, it made us disciplined enough to at least have some slides on at least one laptop. So we had to take out the loaner laptop here and put mine in. So it seems to have been a week just like that, of unexpected. Things of the unexpected, and really this is really kind of the sense of this particular presentation. So casting your minds back now, remember that the theme for this year's CIS was done in around, was it last summer, late last summer, something like that, I think it came out. I mean, Andre talked about it at the end of last year, but really it wasn't sort of kind of fully baked until I think like summer. And of course, there was a particular event going on in the US, around that sort of kind of fall time, if anyone remembers what it was. But of course, a number of things were being said by the presidential candidates. And, we've seen, and some of those, of course, were around what was going to happen with, extreme vetting and travel bans and so on. And it started as I was sort of trying to put these things together, I thought this would be this is a different sort of kind of take on intelligent identity, because the thing about intelligent identity, as we're sort of kind of explaining and hearing about at this conference, is that there's an assumption that the data is going to be available, right? That's the basic assumption that this goes on. And I thought, it'd be interesting to just see what happens if the data wasn't, to give just, it's a thought piece. And this is as much an interactive session as it is anything else. Now, why would Kantara as a non-profit be interested in this? And what I wanted to just briefly point out that, while Kantara has, it's got a new mission actually, it's a global consortium for a start. So it's got members all over the world, including some of those folks in travel banned countries. So, it's very close and poignant to us as what if this travel ban might be expanded to other things. And so we wanted to sort of kind of play that out a little bit. And of course, we're a principled organisation, and we work on the basis of wanting to level up that sort of asymmetric power dysfunction that we currently have in the identity marketplace between users and their control of their data and the big socials and other folks. So with those two things in mind, I just wanted to briefly point out that, we do have a process that Kantara goes through. It's a very low barriers to entry. We nurture a lot of work, and you saw that this morning with ID Pro and our incubation of that. We also develop specifications and things, but ultimately all of those things move towards conformity assessment, because we're really in the business of conformity assessment. But some of these things, in terms of our membership, was pretty interesting. So you see in the membership, right, we have, there's a whole range of members here throughout Europe, and some of the smaller ones are actually not on this slide, where, once again, they come from travel banned members. So this is how I came up with, this title was sort of kind of slightly changed, actually, than the one I actually submitted. But this was one that Andy refined, shall we say. And, when you think of Valerie Plame's keynote on Monday afternoon, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? We talk about, she was very eloquent in the way she described the sort of intelligence with trust. If we apply some of what of Valerie's comments, and then we apply them to this, it'd be interesting, you see. So if you take a simple use case like this. Here's a guy, he's from a foreign land, and he's requiring some entitlement documents. He's identity to an extent, but this is really more about entitlement and attributes than identity per se, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. So his home country might be, Iran or Syria or something like that, and he's a perfectly legal, valid, nice, good guy, and he's trying to study at a university in the US where he's been accepted. And how is he going to get his attributes for his previous qualifications to arrive to his new university home? So just to remind you, it was a fairly long-winded just abstract that was on this presentation, and so just to sort of kind of give you a sense of it, there was sort of kind of two aspects. There was the sort of implications and potential impacts about doing this, and there was this notion of, well, let's look at the other guys. Typically, those guys are bad guys, and they're the unmentionables. And then this interesting. Have that sense sometimes when you look in a mirror and you're looking back at yourself. And there's a sense that we could be facing something like this. Just as Valerie said, the unimaginable actually sometimes happens. And the unimaginable actually is happening more often as time goes on. So, we have to be kind of training ourselves to think about these unimaginable situations, just so that we're not caught completely unprepared. And this was something that the Internet Society got pretty head up about, was the travel ban, and this was, I'm not going to read it all, but it was just, I put it up there to give you a sense that there was quite a lot of outrage about the travel ban, not only from Kathy Brown and ISOC, but folks at Google and lots of Silicon Valley folks, people everywhere who were relying on perfectly good global citizens, doing their own business, minding their own business, and they were basically being stopped from travel, and the impact that it was having on people. So here's a policy that's been potentially put in. Just imagine if we had a policy in a different situation. So let's flip that around for a moment and take a look at what would happen, what's happening in other areas. So let's take North Korea's intranet. It's an intranet because basically the rest of the world is blocked out, right? And so you have to be sort of very high up in the establishment to actually get any sort of kind of external internet connection. We know that there are plenty there, of course, in use daily. But for the average citizen, they're working inside this intranet. So this is looking at this situation from the other way around. So I'm in a country that's basically enclosed. There's no way out, okay? Which is different than being an open country but blocking ways in, I would suggest. So Iran's an interesting one with the halal net, as some people call it, the filter net, or the the throttled net. Iran's a process of kind of dealing with to try and keep the evildoers out. They do this through this process of throttling and filtering, so that they don't do a sort of a North Korea completely banned thing, but they make it uncomfortable, inconvenient, just a general painful user experience to manage. So I'm looking at these things because I'm thinking, okay, so if we had a travel ban and the travel ban was extended to attributes, how might this be invoked? If that was a policy or a law, how would it transfer over to the technical folks? Here's the policy. How are you going to implement it? Because it's maybe just one executive order away. Fortunately, perhaps some might say that the travel ban hasn't actually into effect yet, and potentially may not ever. We don't know, but then it could tomorrow. We just don't know, and this is the sense of wanting to be, protected. And we've had there's been a lot of discussion, of course, around the new Leeds Act, the data stored abroad. Effectively, that's what that does. It replaces the ECPA, is it? I think is what it's called, which is the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. That was the one, if you recall, that got a lot of press when Microsoft, remember this case, it was a few years ago now, where there was an Irish employee, I think, of Microsoft, an Irish citizen, that's right, was using one of the Microsoft services. And there was this sense that he may have been acting illegally in some way. I think it was drugs. And the US government said basically, well, we want information on that guy. And remember that Microsoft said, hang on a minute, the server is an island. It's in Europe, it's not in the US. They said, don't care. So what the Leeds Act was trying to do was trying to modify that slightly so that it only applied to US citizens. So it was a slightly easier, more transparent approach than simply everyone who happened to be on a Microsoft or any other US owned organisation's server. So if it was just identity, the interesting thing about it was just identity, it would feel like it was easier, right? It would feel, certainly, I mean, I have an Estonian e-residency card, and to get that card, I turned up at the Estonian embassy in London, and was fingerprinted. So they had my British passport, didn't have my New Zealand one, but they had my British passport, and fingerprints and various other details in order to get my Estonian ID card. So, if I was caught without an identity, I could potentially use my e-residency card. It doesn't say I'm a citizen of Estonia, but an EID card might, okay? Because there's actually a limited number of steps you can go through from e-residency to an e-citizen. ORCID ID is an education ID, and that's actually quite strongly identity-proofed as well. So for those of you who don't know it, or a digital identity from some other country. I mean, I do have low level of online identity credentials from New Zealand. So, of course, those two other options, of course, you can do it physically, physical passport, or if you've got two passports. So, the identity thing is an interesting one. I mean, you come to the last one there, the decentralised self-sovereign identity, where we're talking in the sort of ID 2020 program sense of that, where you're from another country that perhaps doesn't have any identity registers, or if they are, they're highly compromised. So you're self-attesting to your identity. This is where Phil should be here, right? This is his thing. And of course, lastly, it could be the web of trust. There's sort of people vouching for me. You can imagine these different scenarios potentially playing out here. How do you take a policy? Okay, we're going to block the attributes from 7 selected countries. What's the technical response for something like that? So web of trust might be one. The certificate authority is probably not going to work in this case because of the other side. So if it was DNS and blocking, this is something that ISOC has spent plenty of time on. There's a couple of thoughts there. You could do, peer-to-peer connections over Wi-Fi, and actually web, daisy chain Wi-Fi networks together. In fact, that's actually been done in a number of countries that struggle with external internet access. The other thing is actually literally using one. There's you're sort of getting very close to some of the concepts around Tor and those kind of nets when you're looking at this sort of kind of anonymous, not anonymous on the other side. But it's possible to configure networks like that. But it does come very close to this policy question of net neutrality. And from that perspective, we wanted to just sort of look at the technical responses. So if the US did this, if they actually did an attribute banning from particular countries, how would they be in a position to work with the net neutrality, which is something that they favour generally? So I think it's an interesting one. Certainly, the Internet Society has been working on that quite extensively, and it's got some technical responses about how you would do that. Protocol-based blocking, deep packet inspection, URL-based blocking. So you might take the URLs of universities or .edu or whatever it is at the end, and everything that has a DNS associated with that would be blocked, so you couldn't get the attributes for your postgraduate doctorate or whatever. So Olaf Coltman, who's the CTO, the Chief Internet Technology Officer at the Internet Society, they've actually prepared the RFC 7754 for this sort of kind of blocking and filtering, if you were going to take it down this direction. And it's an interesting scenario where he talks particularly about collective responsibility, fundamental properties and values, evolution and consensus. Think globally, act locally. But at the end of the day, he's actually saying you've got to think creatively and act collaboratively. Now, in a situation like this, we may not. It would be interesting to see how a nation could attempt to block attributes from a particular country if they weren't actually acting in some sort of collaboration, because the attributes can be transferred to another country, to several countries, until you find a country that in fact so you're basically daisy chaining that work till you get to a country that the nation that's rejecting the original attributes would accept it, because they recognise it from a protocol sense coming from a particular IP address range or something like that. So these are open questions, because as I was thinking about this, I couldn't actually get to the answer. I couldn't work out whether there's a separate policy question in terms of identity and entitlement attributes is separate to any other kind of internet filtering, in a broad brush sense, in the way that ISOC has been looking at that problem and producing a standard on it. Or is there a separate technical response? I don't have the answer, but I'd like you to think about it, because I'm very soon going to ask for your views. So anyone in the audience, do you think it's a separate situation? Do you think that that identity and attributes should be in a policy sense separated from, I'm going to ban all internet traffic from country X? Is it separate? Would you allow identity and identity-related attributes to come through, but everything else being separate? Chris?
So I don't actually have a response to your specific question, but it was occurring to me as we're talking. I find it very interesting that even given the environment, that what you're basically talking about when you're proposing the same Internet Society is subverting and trying to get around limitations put in place by the government.
No, absolutely not. Because right down here it says, back up one. No, whatever your consideration, it must comply with ruling law. I'm not suggesting that you break the law at all.
But your premise and the question you asked yourself is very much tied to this travel ban. So you're saying that we're really only one executive order away from not being able to have attributes be blocked from countries.
But
so you're basically offering how to get around.
And if there's laws against getting around it, then that's you've got to accept it. But if there isn't.
But I find it very interesting that we live in a situation, though, where we can have this conversation openly and publicly, even with your disclaimer statement that you still have to abide by prevailing laws.
It's an interesting, vexing question, and I couldn't get to the bottom of it either, because just because you know, and depends whether it's, you know, what type of law it is, for example, you know. There is simply too many variables to answer that, you know, clearly, and it may be quite possible to do it through, you know, the law may be open enough that you're not subverting it. I'm not suggesting that you should ever subvert law. We do.
Does anybody else have comments, questions?
Okay. So one thing is that, you know, if you thought that this would be an issue, this is before the event. Okay. You know, many people have personal data stores. I mean, there's lots of personal data stores and services available. So, you know, if you picked up your attribute from your university, you know, there's a case for having it stored in more than one place. In fact, for security reasons, you should anyway, as a matter of course, right? You know, it's to offset a sort of a honeypot effect. So there's nothing unusual, you know, with that. One thing might be, you know, given the security issues that we have, you know, perhaps a lot of the stuff should actually be on a USB stick. Perhaps an encrypted one. Of course, if you're stopped at the border and your USB stick is going to be analysed, then of course it may be. But I'm looking at different ways that you might look at this. Would such a law, you know, prohibit texting it? You know, file transfer of some description. So, you know, there are different options, many different options that I thought. These are not suggested to be. These are things that you might normally do from a personal data perspective, right? So it's wise, I think, to think about these things before events happen rather than after, and that's the point I was really, you know, trying to make. That when we think that the unexpected will never happen, and it does, then you need to be prepared by thinking about these things in advance. And this is just one example, and it just happened to be one that applied to this conference theme, because intelligent identity is based on the premise that the attributes are available. What happens if they're not? So, with that, I've given you plenty of time for the next presentation. Thank you for your time. I intended it to be a little thought-provoking, and it's interesting doing this. Of course, I'm not an American. I may not be left out, but you know, I think it's still a free enough society that we can speak about these things, and we should.
Thank you, Colin. Does anybody have any questions?